Hey everyone, this is Julian, and this is how you install Serilog in an ASP.NET Core application, more specifically a Blazor web application. So let's get started. And if you've never heard of it, you might ask yourself, what is Serilog? Serilog is a structured logging framework used to write to files, console, Azure Blob Storage, SQL Server databases, you name it. All these places are called sinks. And a sink is just a term to describe a place to write the logs into. And if you're new to software development, you might even ask yourself, what is logging in the first place? And logging is just a process of recording some representative data about your application, say the current state of a function or some exception details that you want to record in order to later find the root cause of the issue. For example, say your brand new web application has got a bug recently introduced in it, and that happens on the login page, for instance. And that prevents the user from logging in, and that's really bad. And the only thing the client is presented to is potentially a 500 server error. And that's okay, you don't want any information to get back to the client. Having said that, you might want to log those exception details in a SQL Server database, which we're going to be doing today, and use those exception details, those logs, to later get to the bottom of the issue, identify the patterns, and ultimately fix the bug. There are two types of logging. There is basic logging and structured logging. And basic logging is, exactly as the name implies, is the most basic way of generating logs. And that could literally be just a piece of string without any other data, any other type of data attached to it. However, structured logging is bound to a specific and consistent format across a web application that can later help with identifying patterns and for analysis purposes. Okay, enough with the overview. Here is what we'll do as part of this video. Step 1. We'll quickly set up the Blazor Server web application. Then step 2, we'll install a package, the package that we need, which is Serilog ASP.NET Core. Normally in a simple console application, you won't need this package. However, we want to simulate a real-world environment, and that's going to be a web app if you're on this channel. And you want to be able to install logging and use logging yourself. Step 3, I'll show you how to set up Serilog to write to console, as we'll be generating some logs for the console. Then step 4, we'll be setting up a Serilog to write to files, and we'll generate a couple of logs for some files. Step 5, set up a SQL Server database with Entity Framework Core, and we'll install a package called Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server, obviously, and we'll create an initial migration that will have our database and our brand new log entity generated for us. More about that at step 5 in the video. And then step 6 and the final one, installing the Microsoft SQL Server Sync Serilog, because we'll need that to be able to generate the logs straight into our log table in our SQL Server database. So, that being said, let's proceed with the video. So, the very first step that we'll need to do is open up Visual Studio 2019. I've got the Community Edition here, and then click on Create New Project. Then as soon as it loads, just click on creating a new Blazor Server app, or if you can't see it in the recent project template section, just search for Blazor Server. Yep, so just pick it from the list. I'll just give it a name, and then choose a path. Just a thing to note, make sure that when you set the project name, you don't set it to Serilog, otherwise it will be hard for you to install packages, because one of the packages that we'll install is obviously going to be Serilog, so just make sure that you name it something else other than Serilog. Maybe name it like myself, so let's carry on. As for the framework, I'm just going to leave it as .NET Core 3.1, no authentication, and click Create. Okay, so we're in. Obviously I skipped the part where it was loading for time purposes, and now that we're in, I'm just going to do a brief overview, a very brief overview of what the app has got and where we will be working in. So obviously we've got the shared pages and the main pages, and we will be working in the fetch data. Actually, I think it's just better if I just run the app for you, so you can basically see how it looks like if you've never seen a Blazor Server app, the actual basic template. So yeah, so this is it. Here is where we'll do our logs. So we've got the home page, the counter, where if we click, just counter changes, and we've got the fetch data. And every time we fetch the data, it's supposed to be different. So yeah, as you can see, the summary is different every time we do it. So we'll make it so that we'll add some system logs, but also we'll do some custom logs so that every time we click a row, we'll add a new log. Yeah, so let's get started. First things first, what we'll need to do is install Serilog for ASP.NET Core. So that's step one. So if we go in Google Chrome, this is the very first thing. So if you're not already on this page, you can just type in serilog.asp.NET Core. And as soon as you do that, the very first package from Serilog will be ASP.NET Core. And what we'll need to do is, just going to choose 4.1.0, copy this and go in the terminal. Make sure that you actually cd into your project, which is this, by doing cd and then pasting into single quotes, pasting in your project path, and then hit enter, and we're there. So here, what you can do now is copy this and then paste it in here. If you don't already have .NET installed, just make sure that you install that on your PC, and this should do the trick. Obviously, let's see a second way of doing this. So a second way of installing Serilog ASP.NET Core is by going in your project, expanding your client project, and then going into dependencies, right click, manage new git packages, go to browse, and then type in the same thing, serilog.asp.NET Core, and then the very first thing should be our required package. And as you can see, the latest table is 4.1.0, so we're just going to install that. So this is exactly the same thing as we would have done by executing that command right here. It's exactly the same version. So yeah, so that's just one thing to keep in mind. That's installed now, right? And we can double check that it is installed by expanding the dependencies and then expanding the packages. And as you can see, we've got Serilog.asp.NET Core, and inside of it we've got Serilog and a few syncs. So like I said, we've got a console sync, we've got a debug sync, we've got a file sync, and these two ones we are going to use throughout this project. Cool. Step 4. So setting up the program.cs file with Serilog. And if we go in the root of the project, we need to open up program.cs. So I'm just gonna collapse this for the time being. Okay, so in here, what we'll do is here a few breakpoints and then log, not breakpoints, but more like spaces, new lines. Obviously, it will not find a Serilogger by default, so we're just going to put down log dot and then press control dot and then say using Serilog. So that's it. So now we're using Serilog. Alternatively, you can just put using Serilog at the very top from the get-go to make sure that it actually finds what you're about to type in. So log.logger equals to console, then create logger. That's it. So we've instantiated the Serilogger. What this line does is actually just writes to console, so it configures Serilog to write to console, and then this one says create logger. So there's the instantiation. Next, we'll wrap this create host builder in a try catch block, just so we can log if something goes wrong. We can actually log what went wrong. Exactly what I said in the beginning of this video. So I type in try and then tab 2 times to have this entire block created for me. What I'm doing now is just logging a piece of information to say to the console starting the web host, and then I'm just gonna paste that line in, and then in the catch block I'm just gonna define an exception variable right here, and then we're just gonna log that as a fatal to say, and then we log the exception and then say host terminated unexpectedly, if I can type. We don't need a throw here, and then finally we do log.close and flush. That's it. That's pretty much all we need. Okay, so what we'll do now is run the app, and to be able to see these couple of nice little logs, we'll run this from the terminal. And to do that, we'll basically do .NET run watch, and this should do the trick. So now the app will start, and as you can see, we've got starting web host. And that's it. That's pretty much it. We won't see the host terminated unexpectedly because it didn't terminate unexpectedly, so everything went fine. So yeah, that's pretty much it with logging to the console. Okay, next up is setting up program.cs, setting up Serilog to log to files. And to do this, we just go in the program.cs, we go in the logger, Serilogger configuration, and we just type in here, write to file. And inside here, we just, the first parameter is the path to the log file that we want to log the logs into. So I'm just gonna put here logs.log.txt. And then the second parameter is the rolling interval. So rolling interval interval.day. And that's pretty much it. So this entails, so what this means is that each day will have a new log file. Right, so all we need to do now that we've set this up is to basically run the app. So that's what I will do. I will run it with the debugger this time, and I will open up. So as you can see, I haven't got any folders called logs, but then as soon as the app actually starts, we'll have a logs folder auto-generated for us. And if I open that up, we've got our log and the date, because we've put the rolling interval to be as day, so we won't have any daytime. If we were to put the rolling interval as hour or minute, we'll have the time as well as the date here. So yeah, as you can see, we've got starting web host. We've got the exact same thing as we had in the console, but now we have it in a file. Right, so the very last step, I'd say step number 5, if I haven't numbered them correctly so far, I do apologize. And at this stage, we'll have to do some prep. So what we'll need to do is, ultimately, the goal is to log to a SQL Server database into a logs table, as we said in the beginning of this video. So to do this, we'll need to install Microsoft Entity Framework SQL Server package. Then we'll need to install obviously Microsoft SQL Entity Framework Core tools. Then we'll need to create a log entity. Then we'll need to create a migration, run that migration. And then we can set up Serilog for writing to SQL Server Database. So we'll do that because potentially some of you haven't done that already, and I'm doing this tutorial from scratch, and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so let's go and install a few packages. And I prepare here Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. We copy this, we paste it in here, and we install the package. Alternatively, like I said in the beginning, you could have gone into dependencies, right click, manage NuGet packages, and browse the package from here. It's up to you however you want to do it. It's exactly the same thing, or it should be exactly the same thing. Yeah, so we've got that there. Then the second package is Entity Framework Core Tools, and this will allow us to create migrations and update the database, and as you can see, enables commonly used commands: add migration, drop database, get DB context. What we'll basically just use add migration and update database. So let's install this real quick. Okay, that's done. And then the last thing is Serilog syncs Microsoft SQL Server. We'll install this. We don't need this for the time being, but we'll need it at some point. Therefore, I'm just going to go ahead and install it anyway, just so we can get rid of package installs forever, at least in this project. So, okay, we've got all those dependencies installed. Now, the next step is to add our logs model. Okay, so let's create a brand new folder and call it models. Ideally, you would have a separate project for Entity Framework for the database context. However, we're just gonna keep it simple here. So inside this folder, we'll create a new class called simply log, and this is very important. Here we'll provide the definition for our logs entity, and this is where our logs will be stored. So it will have, by the way, if I type prop and then double tab, it will create a simple property for me, and this will be an integer called ID, and this is the primary key. Then message, then a message template, then the level. This is either informational, debug, whatever it was, fatal. There are a number of levels that Serilog provides, depending on the type of message that you want to send. Datetime, and here we've got the timestamp of where the log. This is very important for debugging purposes. The exception as a string, and then last but not least, the properties. Okay, so it's, like I said, it is very important that you keep this structure intact, because if this is changed, Serilog might not be able to recognize your entity and might not be able to log in your brand new table. Okay. Next thing we'll have to do is go in and create an application DB context inside the data folder. If you haven't got a data folder already set up for you, go ahead and create it. But we've got it already, so we'll just create a new class called application DB context. Right, and this will inherit from DB context and will import entity framework core. I will type in CTOR to create the constructor, and then in here, this will be an empty constructor, by the way, but it's important to set up the parameters. So DB context, options. This is more like over a boilerplate code that you will need to write in order to have your database correctly instantiated. So application DB context, options. Right. So the constructor is done. Oh, forgot to save this. And now what we'll need to do is link our log entity to the application DB context file. And to do this, we'll just create a new property of type DB set of type log. And we'll call it, we'll call it logs. This is how we will find that log entity throughout the project. Import Serilog, obviously. Oh, sorry, not Serilog. We'll import models. And this way, we have referenced our brand new log entity to the application DB context. Next thing we will need to do is go into Appsettings.json and define our localhost connection string. So I'm just gonna copy and paste that because it's just standard. Okay, that's it. So connection strings. Just make sure that this connection strings is the same throughout the project. So when you define a new property in your appsettings.json, just make sure that you actually copy and paste that where you want to use it. Otherwise, it won't be found and you will have errors. And I just define my localhost default connection string. Right, so the next thing we want to do is go into startup.cs, and it is very important to add this line in the configure services function. Add this line right here that it says services app DB context application of type application DB context use SQL Server. And we'll have to import the entity framework core. And this actually uses default connection. So if we go back to appsettings.json, what I did is just copied and pasted this here, and it is very important to do that, otherwise it will just not work. Yeah, so this is how you set up entity framework core in a .NET Core application. Then the next thing we'll have to do is write our very first migration. So if you have installed the entity framework core tools package, you will be able to do something like this: .NET EF migrations add initial create. This will not error if you have installed that package correctly and your version is correct, obviously. So what this will do is take a snapshot of the entities that we have linked to our application DB context, and it will create a migration file that we can then execute against our local host, against our server, to create the database and the entities needed. And in this case, it's just going to be a simple database and yeah, just a logs entity. So yeah, once that's done, you can go inside your project, and we've got a migration folder created for us. If we expand that, this is our initial create migration that we've created. So as you can see, it's got a migration builder, create table, the name of the table is logs. And here we go. This is the table definition for SQL Server to pick up and create that, generate that entity for us. And to to create the database and the a new table for us, all we need to do is write .NET EF database update and hit enter. And fingers crossed, if everything we've done is okay, then this should basically create our table and database for us. I will quickly go in SQL Server and show you that we haven't got that database that is called Serilog_tut. We've just got the test database, and this is done. So if we refresh the databases again, we've got our brand new database here, and if we expand the tables, we'll have a logs table. Hooray! So if we just select top 1000 rows, I'm expecting this, yeah, so this is empty now. And all we need to do now is, actually, let's just go in the pages in the fetch data and let's add a new function to say log.information row was clicked, and then we'll go ahead and do a using at the top. Serilog. That's it. So this should just work now. Okay, so that every time we click a row, then this log message will be called. Okay. Now that, just to recap, we've created our database, we've created our logs entity. What we'll need to do now is actually, we've installed the Serilog Microsoft SQL Server sync, and we'll need to set that up. That is our last step. And to do that, we'll go in the program.cs file, and we'll need to create a config object. This is going to hold the configuration for our Serilog Microsoft SQL Server sync. So we'll do new configuration, not binder, configuration builder. Yep. Add JSON file. And this will be our Appsettings.json. Then optional false. Then build. Following, we'll do a write to Microsoft SQL Server. So we'll configure the sync, and inside the parentheses we'll do connection string, and we're setting that to config.getConnectionString. And this will be our default connection. So copy and paste that in there. Then we'll have to define the sync options, and this will be a new new MSSql, and this is not defined because we're not using it yet. So what I will do is I will remove this and then add the using at the very top, and the table name will be logs. So this is how we tell, right, okay, cool. So this is how we tell Serilog what table we are going to use. Okay, I forgot to put a semicolon in there. By the way, we'll need to do this as well at the very top of our config function. So minimum level dot override, and then we'll override for Microsoft, and then log event level dot information. And I don't like having this noise here, so I'm just going to remove it and import it at the top. Cool. Right, so all we need to do now is basically run the app and see the results. So we've got, remember, we've got those two custom logs up on the fetch data Razor page. So we'll click the row basically to generate those logs. Just as a thing to note is I have already done this off camera, and I had some logs generated, but I deleted them, so that's why the IDs will be a bit skewed. You'll see what I mean in a second. Okay, so I just clicked a few rows. Now if we head over to SQL Server and hit F5, you will see that the host is being started, and then I clicked a few rows. So the reason why it started with ID 8 is because, like I said, I've already generated some rows off camera, because literally the camera was off during that time, and I had to delete them for the purpose of demonstrating this particular exercise. Right, yes, so that's pretty much it for today's video on how to install and use Serilog into your ASP.NET Core web application. If you did enjoy this video, make sure you hit subscribe and hit like, because it really does help a lot this channel. And until next time, yeah, stay safe.